A very good morning to you and yours and wherever you are joining and watching us from. Good morning from the 2020 PAMRO virtual conference. It is very awesome and we are very pleased that you can join us for the second day of our conference. Look, we had a bumper day yesterday. And so we're very glad that you finally caught on if this is the first time you're joining us to all of the fun that we had. My name is Sia Sangweni and I have the honor, the privilege and the pleasure of being your MC for the next day actually, and also the next couple of hours. Look, how committed am I to being your MC? Well, let me tell you this, because you and I are getting close, right? We can bond. I'm so committed to being your MC that as I was getting dressed this morning, I thought I need to be so impressive to you that I put on cologne, even though I'm in my lounge and you can't even smell it. So I'm going to hope that somehow you can visualize and imagine that I smell great. And you on the other side, did I just fail to mention how awesome you look? Yes, you right there, because you made an effort, you put on pants, even if it's a virtual conference as well. Look, we have so much to discuss over the next couple of sessions, so please feel free to interact with us. Thank you so much for all of your messages as well yesterday. And as we continue on with the various presentations, you can also interact by sending your questions or your comments using the live chat option wherever you're watching us from. We'd love to see your engagement. So yesterday we had quite a lot going on, being able to have a wide variety of speakers, everyone discussing things like chatbot and opportunities amongst African consumers. We even looked at how to drive audience insights to inform your global plans. We also looked at complex automated phone surveys and how they can be an alternative to face-to-face research. And then really one of the major highlights of yesterday was a panel discussion that we had discussing data everywhere, but are we really answering the why? If you were like me, you were probably just making tons and tons of notes galore. And so I'm looking forward to making even more notes as the day goes by, because really there's so much information being shared and great ideas being exchanged here that it really is an awesome experience. So once again, from wherever you are watching us from, it really means a lot that you are here. And it also really means a lot that we have committed partners who are supporting us here at the 2020 PAMRO virtual conference. So a shout out to our partners who made today and the conference at large possible. So thank you to Borderless Access, DSTV Media Sales, Nielsen and Telmar as well. They are the ones who are building and really committed to Vision 2020, where we are looking at the African decade, African data, and more especially African growth. The whole conference overall is themed around the story of African resilience. So on behalf of all of our speakers, I just have to say, get ready to be inspired. If you're missing out on anything, or if you want to get information on what we'll be discussing today, and also just the PAMRO relationship overall, please feel free to visit the PAMRO website on pamro.org. That's PAMRO.org. So without wasting any more time, let's get straight into it. But I think as a means of starting day 2 of our virtual conference, here is a very quick word from one of our partners. Our first presentation today is all about gathering audience insights using mobile technology. So Reality Mind will demonstrate how it leverages media host broadcasting monitoring infrastructure across Africa as a whole, using smartphones to gather consumer behavior insights such as listening and viewer data. So it will be presented by Luke Biggins, who's the VP of Client Development at Reality Mind, and Mike Smith, who's the MD at MediaHost. So just some background knowledge. Mike Smith is the founder and managing director of MediaHost, and MediaHost is an advertising tech provider that offers TV and radio compliance and insights, while Luke Biggins' role at Reality Mind is to work with existing global key accounts whilst also introducing new clients to Reality Mind to bring passive behavioral data to a wider audience. Look, I have to say, I said it yesterday and I'll repeat it again. We have some of the greatest and brightest minds who are imparting their wisdom. So without any further ado, and also some of those greatest minds, please, wherever you are, welcome Luke Biggins and Mike Smith.
Hi, everyone. Pleased to be here with you all today. What an introduction, Sia. Thank you for those words. As Sia mentioned, myself and Mike will be sharing a paper focused on gathering audience insights from mobile technology. We've initiated this partnership with Media Host some time ago, and we're looking to address some questions. Is there a need within the media industry and within audience measurement for some new solutions, new capabilities? And what are those capabilities? What infrastructure would you need if you wanted to take what is out there today and improve on and add some new capabilities into the market? And what progress have we made and what plans have we got? So these are some of the topics that we want to share with you today. Before we do so, we will talk a little bit about each company, and we'll give Mike an opportunity now to introduce himself.
Thank you, Luke. Am I live? Yeah. Yeah, thanks for the introduction, Luke and Sia, and a special thank you to PAMRO and the organizers, and a special thanks to everyone who's listening in. It's much appreciated. So we've got a business media host that's been around a while. I'll explain in a bit more detail later, but I grew up in the post-production industry and have founded a few businesses along the way, like Video Lab, post-production, and we spent the last 4 or 5 years in the media space, where we've got a business of media management and media monitoring. So I think I'm going to go straight into the presentation and over to Luke. I'm just going to share that. And I'm going to go here. Sorry, let's get this. I've got to go to full screen. There we go. Well, that's the introduction. So the next slide is basically an introduction to Media Host and Reality Mind. So over to you, Luke.
Yeah. Super, thank you. So just in terms of Reality Mind, we are a software business. We focus on collecting data from different types of devices, primarily smartphone devices, and our core market is market research and consumer insights and audience measurement. Over the years, we've become an adept at capturing a range of different data points, primarily focused around media consumption, and leveraging smartphone devices to capture wider data, which is where our discussions with Mike and the Media Host team started from. So our technology is integrated into a number of measurement currencies around the world in various markets. And we're also working in a number of syndicated media research products, such as Kantar, TGI, YouGov Profiles, and others.
Well, thanks, Luke. So Media Host is made up of 2 divisions, really. Everything that happens before broadcast, and we're the exclusive licensee for AdStream in Sub-Saharan Africa. And it's advertising, media management, and distribution of broadcast content to print, out of home, all media. So we collect finished advertising material from over 300 production suppliers, and we process it and deliver broadcast-ready files to media owners. We're the guys who invented telestreaming about 20 years ago, those of you old enough to remember. About 5 years ago, we decided to start tracking the ads that we sent to the broadcasters, and we launched Analytics, officially launched a couple of years ago, and we monitor music and advertising content from over 300 TV channels across Africa and over 1,000 radio stations via our in-country partnerships. Over to you, Luke.
So let's just start off with maybe a little bit of context and answering some of those questions around is there needs in the audience measurement industry that we can help to address. So there's been some long-term changes, concepts of audience fragmentation and the proliferation of devices are not necessarily new, but have been the adoption of video has accelerated some of these changes, and what this has meant in a number of markets is unidentified viewing across some TV measurement services is increased. We also see changes in device consumption, and specifically the rise of mobile, and video consumption on mobile can happen anywhere, not necessarily in the home, and that again adds challenges to existing audience measurement hardware technologies. COVID has obviously had an impact in many different ways for many of us. One of the impacts in terms of audience measurement is that consumer behavior has changed significantly. The rhythm of people's days and the patterns of people's days has changed. And so we can't say that looking at audience measurement data from early parts of the year will be accurate as of today. So we have this challenge where there is a great need to understand the patterns of behavior. Concurrently, there is many restrictions in place for some of those methods. So it's very hard to do face-to-face recruitment over the last number of months. And in the UK, in Australia, and in South Africa, this has had a significant impact on the radio currencies in those markets. So we've got some long-term trends. We also have the short, sharp shock that COVID has brought. But we also see COVID as a catalyst for innovation and change. The presentation from 3M3A yesterday highlighted that in the auditing area. And we see an opportunity or a potential need that mobile devices can address to complement or enhance some of the capabilities that are existing around diary methodologies to improve audience measurement, and that is only being accelerated by the current situation. So, okay, there is potentially a need, but what would mobile offer? And that was another question, myself and Mike looked to address. Okay, there's challenges, but why would mobile be a solution? And we had to make sure we're comfortable ourselves that there was a need. So there was enough reasons to initiate this partnership. So some of those reasons will just flash up on the next screen. Mobile is a way to achieve scale in the sense that there's many millions of people who have a mobile device, and in certain African countries, the smartphone population now is over 50%. It's much easier to scale software than it is to scale hardware. We're not sending hardware to people. We're not having hardware installed by technicians and so on. Smartphones sit within a meter of people throughout the 24 hours of the day. So it's a great device for capturing information on what that person is actually doing. It's always present and with them. And with the proliferation of different channels and different services, it's very hard for people to recall what they've actually done. So there's definitely acceptance that a passive method is superior, and the smartphone is a way to do that accurately. Mike will talk about the kind of coverage you need. There is an infrastructure that you need to do this. And we'll talk about what we need in terms of coverage. We also see this as a complementary method. There's, some people will be using electronic methods such as people meters, others diaries, others survey recall methods, and so on. And in some places, there'll be no television, radio, or online measurements at all. So depending on the scenario, a solution could be the solution in the market, or it could complement what's already there. Increasingly, there's a need for cross-media and understanding from a single person what media they're consuming across different channels. We see that across a number of industry tenders globally. And so the mobile device is a great way to capture data across television, radio, as well as what is happening actually on that person's device. So I think we were satisfied that there's enough reasons why mobile could be a good way to capture audience insights, but we need to have the right infrastructure and capabilities to do that. So Mike will share a little bit about what Media Host have and the work that they've been doing in this space.
So just to tell you about the media infrastructure we've got, essential to our business model is our unique advantage of having a very sophisticated broadcast capture, recording process infrastructure producing data. We basically harvest data off linear radio and television. So we have over 300 TV channels recording from DTH platforms, DSTV, OpenVHD, DSTV Africa, Star Times, Zap, Zuku, Azam, and we've got a receive site in Canal Plus in Nairobi. We work with local partners to receive terrestrial-only channels, but there are very, very few terrestrial-only channels in Africa. And most of those terrestrial-only channels are fed via satellite. So we can receive in Joburg and Nairobi, we can receive a huge volume of channels. In South Africa, we've got fully redundant receive sites, both based in Linden and Rivonia. Rivonia at a site called Telemedia. It's a teleport with 24 satellites pointing all over the place. So we can literally access many thousands of TV channels. In radio, locally, we're recording over 200 radio stations received from primary FM receivers across the major centers. And then obviously the satellite platforms have, DTH platforms have DSTV and OpenVHD, have radio, and then internet streams. But it's interesting, of the 200 and odd radio stations that carry advertising, 43 radio stations carry 99% of the ad spend. So our focus on the primary sites is on those. And then we've got a massive data infrastructure to process huge volumes of data and a data warehouse to basically access that data. So, you know, you might ask what on earth a video media host got to do with audience measurement. So I thought I'll just give you a bit of a basic of the tech behind how a mobile phone is used. And I think you're all familiar with Shazam, which is basically ACR, and we'll be referring to ACR quite a bit. It's automatic content recognition. And you know, the same principle applies to Shazam. You activate the microphone on your phone. It generates a fingerprint. It sends it to a database in the cloud and at Shazam, and it will find a match against a database of millions of songs, and it'll return to your phone the song you're watching. So when we're looking at live channel detection, we have a similar process, except we use an application that's installed on your phone that automatically activates your microphone, and it can activate it 10 times a minute. It depends on the granularity you want and obviously the performance of the phone. So it basically generates a fingerprint on your phone. It sends it back to our reference database, and we have a master reference database of all the channels. So the microphone will activate and listen to the ambient sound, whatever sound is on in the room or the car or wherever you are. It will create a fingerprint, send it to the database, and then it will search through that database and find a match. Once a match is found, it will report the source of that match. And that source of the match could be the radio station, the TV station. And as technology improves, it could be YouTube, it could be a pirated clip, it could be a bit of, it's radio or TV, it's whatever that the ambient sound is of that microphone. So back to our core business, we use the same technology to reference TV and radio ads. We've got a reference database of all ads. You know, fortunately in South Africa, we're fortunate to have 80% of the ads before broadcast. So we reference the exact ad and we can detect that ad without any human intervention. And in the same way we do music. We've started a project in partnership with a music colleague, Jared Ashton. We've got a joint venture called Audalytics, and we are tracking music across multiple radio stations, etc. So I've done this diagram to try and explain how the process works. So on the left here, I can just go to a pointer. Here's my pointer here. So on the left here, we've got all the sources. So we've got live TV, we've got live shifted TV, which is catch up. So that's a recording of, say, 14 days of recording. We've got live radio, we've got podcasts. I've put in orange because this is still work in progress, Netflix, YouTube, etc. So of all the new ways of viewing content, we'll find a way of getting a reference database of that. So we've got a reference database of all these sources of content. On the right, we've got our database of adverts I spoke about, our database of music, and now we're getting a getting from a mobile phone, and I've had a bit of license and assume an Android watch with a microphone will be able to detect the sound and send a fingerprint back to the database. So here we've got the matching process. So we sit and match everything that's coming and we're against that. But we've also got all the media schedules and broadcaster logs coming in to find a match. So we've got this process, we call it an associative engine, which really compares huge sets of databases. So we can compare a massive log against something else and find a match, find an exception, and all this data goes into a data warehouse. So the data warehouse is what our core business is that's the data. The whole conference is about data. That data we make available to research companies, to other monitoring companies, because we call ourselves a single source of truth. What happened on air happened on air. And I'll show you ways that we can prove that. So out of that, we've got insights. So all the insights, this ad is playing, how many phones are connected at that time or listening to it at that time, et cetera, et cetera. The list goes on. And then we've got compliance. Did you get what you paid for? Did the music play as per the contract or whatever the case is? So there's just loads and loads of data that you can understand that goes through that. So what's critical to data is record keeping and metadata for accurate reporting. And I just wanted to go through a few examples of how critical accurate record keeping is in this process. So if we've got an activation we've got a match from a mobile phone, that bit of reference we've got has got a unique identifier. And that unique identifier identifies the user who's opted in and all the information that you research guys know about that relates to that user of that phone. And the maintenance of those records is absolutely critical for that data to be representative. And I think the same applies. I don't think the same applies. It does certainly apply to an advert. Every advert has a unique identifier. We're working with a global company called AdID to globally identify every single advert. In South Africa, we call it a flight code. And there's a lot of data that's represented by the accuracy of that flight code. So when a flight code is reported, a unique identifier is reported on an ad, it also contains a whole lot of usage rights and music rights. For example, a musician gets paid every time that ad flights. So for the CMO to accurately report when that music's played, they need very accurate data that the music is played. And the same as a talent. An artist might have a contract artists might have a contract for 2 years and did the ad flight in another area. The same applies for songs. Every song has a unique identifier. We've got two codes, the ISRC and the ISWRC. So we use the same process to identify unique content. Over to you, Luke.
Yeah, so MediaHost has a really impressive infrastructure, as you've seen, and they can answer a number of different business questions. When we think about audience measurement and audience insights, what we're looking to do is report this on a panel. So create a representative panel of people and report it from that panel. How many people have watched different stations and channels and shows, etc. And in order to do that accurately, we need to get data at scale on people's devices. And so Reality Mind has a number of years of experience deploying research applications onto devices. We have currently over 200,000 devices globally, which our clients have gathered data from and integrate into different audience measurement and insight products. So the capabilities that we bring to complement what MediaHost have done is around the panel management, compliance management, and communications piece. That's kind of parts of our core business, which we utilize for this project. What we've also done, working with ACR technologies for a number of years, is optimize the user experience. People who've maybe used or experienced ACR on mobile devices for audience measurement will have seen that there is things like a battery impact. What we've done over time is improved our technology, specifically looking at some entry-level devices and devices with older batteries to optimize the performance and reduce the impact. We've also developed ways to recognize that the user, the primary reason they've got a smartphone is not to participate in research. So we don't want to impact on how they're using their device normally. Examples of this will be someone is taking a video call, and that's obviously using the microphone. So what we don't want to do is create a bad experience because that microphone should be given over to WhatsApp or Skype or whatever service they're using. So we've optimized the experience to recognize that a Skype call's coming in, and then we toggle off our usage of the microphone for the duration of that call. So just an example of where we've put the panelists first. We recognize that their user experience is paramount to us maintaining a stable, sizable panel and capturing good quality data. What we also do is report data from those devices too. So that's where the whole cross-media piece comes in as well. So if we just flick on, Mike, to the next slide. So, we're really clear and transparent. Media Host and Reality Mine, primarily data and technology companies. We're not research businesses, research agencies. What we do have, though, like when we combine the capabilities of the two businesses, is like the biggest and best, most robust reference data set available in Africa. We have the ability to deploy technology onto panelists, participants' devices, and link that database, link those devices to the reference databases. And we also have the ability to understand what is actually happening on those devices too. So we can add all of these elements together as part of an audience insight product.
And I think that the value add to broadcasters is really, having another source of data that's reliable and accurate third-party audience data, supporting media sales, programming, and content management. But we've been very successful in identifying and correcting scheduling errors of broadcasters. So broadcaster logs should be the truth, and we've got ways of helping broadcasters eliminate compensation and make their logs accurate, and also providing competitor insights. But basically, as I said earlier, we're the single source of truth, and we can verify what happened on air. And I just want to take this opportunity just to switch quickly to our live presentation of where we are. And I'm just going to go full screen here. And basically, these are the countries in Africa that we are monitoring at the moment. And I can start off, I just have a quick look at South Africa. And I can select the media type and look at TV. And just giving a quick glimpse of this 12 months year to date. It just shows you from January to now, the spend last year against the spend this year. And we can see where there's a decline and how it's changed. I've got very little time, so I'm going to shoot it through very quickly. But we can also refer to all the channels that we are monitoring. And we can select a year, and let's just look at October. And then we could, we can see, from Unilever, the biggest advertiser, this is showing the number of detections, ads flighted, and here we show the spend. So, Unilever is the biggest spender during October. SABC one, this is all based on rate cards, but I can go into ETV and have a look at, who's operated in ETV. And wherever I go, we keep a recording of every one of these ads. So here I can play back the ad, and so there's the ad we had a few minutes ago. So I can spend hours on this, but basically we've got huge amount of data that we can slice and dice, and you can literally pull any insight that you could possibly imagine. For the presentation. So just the last point I wanted to say with a single source of truth, we've got all the radio stations. I can select Radio 5, We've also pulled in the music data. So here's Radio 5 today from the first, every song that was played. Here's an ad that had breaked, etc. And I can go back in time and monitor that. We've got the same for TV. I can play back Citizen TV this morning. There's a news.
To the T regulation.
So there's a
really,
Citizen TV this morning. So I've just given you a very quick glimpse that the infrastructure you're talking about is real, it works, and we're recording. For those techies in here, we generate about 6 terabytes of data a day. So back to the presentation. Oh, done, sorry, what's going on? Oh, present, yeah, there we go. Over to you, Luke.
Yeah, so I think, it's clear there is demand in the market, whether there is no audience data available, or there's challenges with current methodologies, or there is an acceptance that the level of unidentified viewing is too high. We see clear demand, whatever the scenario in different countries. When we look at the infrastructure and capabilities that are required, whether that's the ability to deploy and create a good user experience on the device through to the reference databases needed, we've made sure that between us we have all of those bases covered, and we've gone through a process to integrate these capabilities and conduct testing in South Africa. So we've validated that we can capture data from people's devices using the media host infrastructure and report accurate data. So we've gone through that initial housekeeping, and we have some next steps that we'd like to take.
Yeah, and we're very happy to develop relationships with any existing organizations. We are a South African company, we're 51% Black owned, and we have a very transparent business ethic, and very open to work with any other organizations where our data could be enhanced and value added. So we can enable an audience measurement and insight solution. We have tested the situation and run a bunch of phones, and it does work. If the phone's in your pocket and the radio is playing, we can identify the radio station. So we've done some fairly rudimentary tests that it does work. Yeah, thanks very much. I think that's it for us. And here are our details, myself and Luke, and thank you everyone for your time and listening to us.
Mike, thank you very much. Luke, thank you very much. Look, when I said we have some of the greatest and brightest minds presenting here at this conference, I meant it. And now already you can see why. It was fascinating to hear from both of you guys. But Mike, you said 6 terabytes of data. That is impressive, okay? I don't know about you, but do you see that full board of channels and the stations and the data that Mike is sitting on top of? Like, it is crazy and unreal that we now are living in a day and age where we have people who are on top of all of this. Look, I don't know whether you've heard or not, but there's a new James Bond movie currently in pre-production, and a little birdie told me that Mike was originally offered a role in the movie, but he had to turn it down, actually, because, I mean, it wasn't fun when they hired him in the movie to track the villain, but because of all of the data, he could actually track the villain in a couple of seconds, which means there wouldn't be an actual movie. It wouldn't be fun. There's no plot, okay? That's how impressive Mike is. Mike and Luke, thank you very, very much for that. Remember, if you do have any questions and comments for Mike or Luke and any of our speakers today, you can send through your comments and your questions using the live chat, and we'll be able to get to them just before our next coffee break. But before we move on, here's a quick word from one of our partners. So now moving on to the second presentation of the day, Charlie Fox and Annemarie Elfrinkhoff are members of the Affluent team at Ipsos, Netherlands Audience Measurement Department. Look, if there was an award today for the coolest title, I think Charlie and Anna-Marie would get it, the Affluent team. Well, the Affluent team is responsible for the sister surveys at Ipsos Affluent Africa, Ipsos Affluent Europe, Ipsos Affluent Middle East, and the cross-regional databases, Ipsos Affluent EMEA and Ipsos Affluent Global. And they'll be looking at actionable media insights about affluent Africans. So here's the gist of what they'll be discussing. The spending power of affluent Africans, those belonging to the top 15% income group, has caught the eye of many advertisers and international media. Now, the digitization might have changed the way the affluent access, read and watch international media, but it hasn't stopped at all the growth of their international media consumption. So Ipsos has recent results that show an increase in trust in international media compared to national media. And moreover, their dynamic business attitude makes the affluent African stand out regionally. So the new release of the Ipsos Affluent Africa survey data combines a very accurate picture of media consumption habits and also behavior of affluent individuals and business decision makers living in the main cities of the continent, with a very wide range of lifestyle information and buying intentions for high-end products and services. So thus providing insights into the profiles of resilient affluent Africans. This is what Anna-Marie van Elfrinkhoff, Senior Research Executive at Ipsos, and Charlie Fox, Associate Research Director at Ipsos, will be discussing. So over to you, Anna-Marie and Charlie.
Well, thank you very much, Sia. I couldn't have put it all better myself. It's very nice to have the opportunity here to present at the PAMRO conference, so we thank you for that. In our case, we're coming from a very northerly Amsterdam, but it's particularly satisfying for us to be able to present here to PAMRO, because for our team here this year has been a very significant one in terms of our Africa research. And I'll be speaking to you today about the Affluent Africa 2020 survey that we've done, as you say, with my colleague Anna-Marie. And as you mentioned, we both work in audience measurement at Ipsos. So let me just share my presentation. So I hope you can see that now. Okay. Let me just try again. How's that? Okay. Yeah, thank you. Excellent. Okay, so some of you tuning in today, you'll already be familiar with the Africa survey, but we're very well aware that for others of you, you may not know so much about it, if anything. So particularly for those of you who are new to it, I'll be starting with a quick description of what the Affluent Africa survey is. And then Anna-Marie would like to share with you some of the interesting findings that we've discovered this year, particularly looking at media use and product and services consumption behavior across Africa. And what we hope to do is to give you an appreciation of how relevant this survey is to the region and even globally, and also to help share with you some interesting media statistics in particular that we found out about Africa. Fitting with the theme of this year's conference, we'll certainly show some strong dynamic African data, as well as the changes in attitudes towards media and growth within the region. So, what is Affluent Africa? Well, Africa, as Sia mentioned, Affluent Africa is part of our suite of media and marketing surveys. What we do is we cover approximately the top, well, around the world, about the top 13 to 15% of the population, measured in terms of their income. So what this means is, we're looking at the top 15%, which is obviously an important target group, because these are people who are the well-off, high net worth individuals with much higher than average spending power. And therefore they're the very obvious consumers. They're the trendsetters. They're opinion leaders within their communities, and in business, they're the key decision makers wherever they work. So they're very highly visible, and there are a lot of activities and consumption patterns that go along with this. For example, they tend to be the very frequent travelers, and all this. This is significant. It makes it a very significant, probably the most significant international media survey that specializes in this top end of the market. And because of this, it's used by many of the most well-known global media brands and international media agencies. Just thought I'd give you a selection here of some of our main subscribers. So, Affluent Africa is sort of the African element of the Affluent project is also very well established in its own right. So the first iteration was 10 years ago, in fact, in 2010. And what we're talking today about is the latest 2020 survey, which is the 6th time that we've specifically surveyed Africa. And in fact, the new results are relatively hot off the press. We released the data last month in September. So for this year's survey, we covered 8 countries across Africa. Those are Cameroon, Ghana, Nigeria, South Africa, Uganda, and we added Cote d'Ivoire for the first time. And what we aim to do, in fact, is to cover a range of countries to provide a selection of the whole of the continent, so covering Northwest, East and South, and to get a good representation of the varied markets out there. And a big part of this is to make sure we got a good representation of the different media landscapes across the whole continent. We conducted almost 2,800 interviews this year through a combination of online and face-to-face. We did those in the major cities of the countries I've just mentioned. And what that represents then is a universe of 4.1 million affluent individuals. Yes, and so we collect a vast range of data, which once we've collated it, processed it, and delivered it, we release it to subscribers through media software. And you can see here there's a sense of who the affluent are in Africa. They have an average age of 38. They average income of $42,000 or equivalent. They're very highly educated. They're slightly more male than female, and we conduct the interview in multiple languages. So the data we collect is indeed very wide ranging. So what this means is you've got a selection of what it is we ask about here. So we collect a lot of media behavior data, of course, but also a lot of consumer spending information about product purchasing and usage, brand data, detail on travel, cars, finance, what the affluent are getting up to, what they're interested in, and a whole range of attitudinal statements to make the data very usable for all sorts of activities like, for example, market segmentations. We also cover a lot of demographics, of course, and a lot of information about their business activities. What I should just add is that from a media research point of view, which is what we're talking about today, one of the unique strengths of the survey is that it enables you to compare international media brands with national titles all across the continent. Okay, so that completes my summary, the very quick summary of the survey. I'll now hand over to Anna Marie, who will tell you a bit more about what we've discovered this year.
Thank you, Charlie. Good day. My name is Anna Marie, and I will show you some results of the latest Affluent Africa survey. As Charlie mentioned, there are 5 regional affluent surveys run by Ipsos. This gives the unique possibility to compare the affluence across the globe. So in the following slides, we compare the affluence in Africa with affluence in the Middle East and Europe, and as such providing context to the African results and showing what is exciting and different about the affluence in Africa. So with this first overview of a selection of demographics and attitudinal statements, we show what is unique and different about the affluent in Africa. The demographics and attitudes show that the affluents in Africa are relatively young compared to the other regions, and they're highly educated, as Charlie pointed out. But what we see now when we compare them to the affluents in other regions is that more affluents in Africa have a university degree than affluents in Europe. And in Africa, affluents are very entrepreneurial. In Africa and the Middle East, relatively more affluents are business decision makers, and more of them are involved in capital expenditure of more than $30,000. This shows that they are more often involved with significant purchase decisions on behalf of their company. When we look at the attitudes, we see that a large majority of more than 80% of affluents in Africa like to try out new things. Mobile technology, as you see, is central in their everyday activities, more so than in other regions. And we will come back to this later. 3/4 of the affluents in Africa considers themselves as an entrepreneur and a global citizen. They do not mind paying extra for quality or for environmental friendly products. As the affluent in the Middle East, they express who they are with what they wear much more than the affluent in Europe. This comparison shows that affluents in Africa are energetic and active, and more so than their counterparts in the rest of the world. In the following slides, we look at how unique affluent Africans are with regard to business activities and mobile technology. Our data shows that affluents in Africa are particularly entrepreneurial and dynamic. We asked the affluent what business activities they did in the last 12 months. Here you see the results for the 3 regions for 4 business activities. Compared to affluents in the Middle East and Europe, more affluent Africans formulated a strategic business plan, addressed a conference or a public meeting, raised capital or invested funds for the company, or set up a new company. They almost have a business style of their own. And when we look at these numbers in the context of the theme of this conference, we see that this confirms that affluents in Africa are in a resilient position to face today's uncertainties. Well, another aspect of what makes affluent Africans stand out is their use of mobile technology. Our data gives confirmation that this is very central to their lives. As I'm sure everybody here knows well, smartphone use is very high across Africa, and not only for the affluent. In the 3 regions we picked out here, more than 90% of the affluent have a smartphone. But in Europe, they don't use it as intensely as in Africa or the Middle East. We defined 3 types of mobile phone users: light user, medium user, and heavy users. And the difference across the regions is remarkable. Where the majority of mobile users in Africa and the Middle East are heavy users, this is true for only 1/3 in Europe. So as you see, we defined a heavy mobile phone user as someone who uses it more than 11 hours a day, but 11 hours a week. But 11 hours a week is actually normal behavior in Africa and the Middle East, while it is a lot in Europe. So not only do we see high levels of use of mobile technology, but the survey also gives numbers to prove what a very significant market Africa is for many upmarket products and services. The affluent like to spend, and that makes them of interest to many advertisers. These are the gross amounts spent in the last 12 months in the 8 countries we surveyed, and these are significant amounts for each category. Over $4 billion on designer clothing alone, almost $3 billion on luxury watches and jewelry each, and almost $7 billion on hotel nights and $8 billion on airline tickets. If you are an advertiser in any of these categories, you would like to analyze in greater detail. And here is a basic example of this. This shows how you can use this survey to identify markets for products and services, spending behavior across age groups. We see here the difference in age profiles for the different spending categories. The market for hotels and airlines is stronger amongst older affluents. And the market for jewelry, watches, and designer clothing, on the other end, is stronger amongst younger affluents. Of course, much more detailed analysis is possible. Well, after benchmarking the affluence against other regions, and here across age groups, we now turn to media behavior. Actionable media insights. So far, we have shown you comparisons across the 3 regions, highlighting the differences and similarities of these regions and show how unique Africa is. Many advertisers, however, will be active in one region only, or specific countries. How to pinpoint actionable media insights for them? Well, we have 2 solutions. One, by comparing to the past. We do this survey every other year and provide trendable data. Second, by relating the media behavior with the consumption behavior. In this section, we will give you examples of both. Across Africa, we have seen media consumption grow across all platforms, including print and TV. What is really noticeable is the growth in digital consumption. In 2 years, it has grown from 294 minutes, which is almost 5 hours a day, and that was in 2018, to 345 minutes, which is almost 6 hours a day right now, so which is a considerable increase. Of course, there are different ways of measuring how brands are being effectively communicated. Reach and frequency are, of course, important, but so is the context in which advertising is received. Here, we look at how affluent perceive different types of media. This is the 2nd time in Africa we have measured brand engagement, and it is revealing already. We aggregated the results and compare international media with national media. We see the perceptions of media changing over time. Starting on the left, you see shifts in the level of trust. More affluents in Africa have come to trust international media, and at the same time, the level of trust in national media has decreased. And we see similar patterns for in-depth and influential, where African affluents have come to value the international media higher on these measures, and their appreciation of national media has been declining in recent years. This matches what we know from other sources about the perception of media. We will now present an example of how you can combine media behavior with purchase and data to help guide media planning. We picked out some numbers to illustrate what kind of data is available. We chose jewelry, a high expense purchase. We mentioned already that the affluent in Africa spend $2.8 billion on jewelry. But how do advertisers know where to find the affluent most likely to spend money on jewelry? 3 takeaways. The pie chart shows a breakdown of how much affluent are spending in the last 12 months. As you see, 13% spent between $495 and $1,979, and 4% spent more than $1,980. That means that there are 172,000 affluent who spent nearly $2,000 or more on jewelry. So this is an example of an exercise that can be useful to size the market of jewelry. On the right hand, you can see how our brand data can help you look at market share and analyze customers for particular brands, or even look for potential customers. Thirdly, below that, we show how spending behavior can be combined with media consumption to identify high spending consumers of jewelry. High spenders index highly for print, digital, and particular podcasts. For TV, the index is the same, but that's because of the high penetration of international TV amongst all affluents. We see that about 99% of the affluents in Africa regularly watch international TV channels. So this is giving you a glimpse of what we discovered with the Affluent Africa survey. In summary, the affluent represents the important top 15% income group. We have a lot of rich, actionable data about media behavior and consumption. The data confirms that the affluent in Africa are particularly dynamic and therefore resilient. Their significant spending power makes them commercially compelling for advertisers. We showed that media habits are evolving and shifting more and more to digital formats, and that there are changes in attitudes to media in terms of trust. So you can use this rich data to guide your marketing and media strategies. And to sum up, Affluent Africa data gives you a detailed understanding of consumer lifestyles, mindsets, and habits. Thank you. Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much, Anna Marie, and thank you very much, Charlie. I'm going to take this opportunity quickly to bring back Luke and Mike as well, Luke Biggins and Mike Smith from Reality Mine and Media Host respectively, as we look through some of your questions that you have sent in to our presenters. I did say that if you have any questions or comments, you can send them through the live chat function. We have our great minds here that you can pick quickly for the next few minutes just before we head over to our coffee break. The first question comes from Delia van Staden, and she says, really impressive, Mike and Luke. And she starts off by asking, starts off by asking, can you share the markets outside of South Africa that you collect TV and radio data for? I think, Mike, you are on mute.
Okay, can you hear me now?
You've given us a great monologue, but you're on mute.
No, we've got a receive site in Copenhagen, and we're doing 21 TV channels in Denmark, Norway, and Sweden. Outside of that, not at this moment in time, but very much on the plans. We're planning to expand this to a global business.
Awesome. And Luke, to you, Delia would like to know also, can you share your rollout plan across the other markets?
It's a good question. I think we're at the stage, now where we've kind of proven to ourselves the value of the combined capabilities, and we're clear on what kind of questions we can answer with that. In terms of which markets we'll go to, I think we're two technology companies, and we're really looking for the right collaboration. So that would have to be some either a research business, some business skilled in audience measurement, audience insights. Obviously, we need kind of cornerstone clients, typically broadcasters or others within the industry, and we need to obviously have a compelling case in a particular market for where the need is greatest. So we're on that journey of trying to define that scope. So we'd be keen to hear from anyone who feels like that they have a need that we can help address, or they would like to discuss partnering with us, whether that's in South Africa or any of the other countries within Africa where Media Host has an infrastructure, and that's many of the the key markets. So bit of a woolly answer, but I hope that gives you guys and everyone on the call an idea of where we are in terms of
Right. Awesome. Thank you for that. And Anna Marie and Charlie, what would you have to say? You stressed the point, and it seems so obvious and greatly rewarding of being able to mine this type of insight all over Africa. What would you have to say to those advertisers who aren't making use of it just yet?
Well, we'd say you're missing out on a great opportunity. Yeah, it is amazing how much information there is out there that we gather, and we're adding to it all of the time. So each iteration of the survey, we're adding in new information, new media platforms, new lifestyle statements. Particularly this year, we touched on the product purchasing amounts and particular brands. We asked about brands in a number of different categories. So all the time, the scope for using the data is increasing for all kinds of advertisers.
Right. And Marie, anything you'd like to add there?
Well, and not only the questions that we asked, but this year we have also increased the number of countries that we survey, which is Côte d'Ivoire, which is actually make it more interesting for those focused on Francophone markets to engage with our data. So that would be another reason to get in touch with us.
Awesome. Thank you very much. Thank you to all of our presenters who have shared their information with us in the first leg of our full day conference. A big thank you once again to Luke Biggins, VP of Client Development at Reality Mine, Mike Smith, MD at Media Host, Anna Marie van Elgeringhoff, Senior Research Executive at Ipsos, and Charlie Fox, Associate Research Director at Ipsos. Now, ladies and gentlemen, wherever you are, we'll be taking a 5 to 8 minute coffee break, and then we'll be back with the second leg of our day 2 PAMRO virtual conference for 2020 as we shift gears, but we carry on learning and exchanging great research ideas. If you want to add into the conversation, feel free to share your questions and comments using the live chat function. We'll be back straight after this. Welcome back to day 2 of the Pan-African Media Research Organization virtual conference, that is PAMRO. Thank you so much for joining us. Again, my name is Sia Sangweni, your MC this afternoon. So wherever you're joining us from, I hope you feel part of the conversation, and you can do so by sending us your question and comments for our presenters through the live chat function. We love receiving all of them. And then I also have to make special mention of the fact that technically this is our biggest conference ever because of the fact that we're virtual and you're joining in from wherever. So we love seeing all of these different names pop up and all over the world. It really is cool to have you with us. Before we continue on with the program, here's another very quick word from one of our awesome partners.
There's been a great deal of
How is this going to impact the way that folks consume
On speculation that these two companies are looking to
this
combine.
now opens the floodgates for mega mergers?
Brand safety, consumer brand safety, legal brand safety, fake news.
Data is now the new gold, the new oil.
No matter what happens, stories will need audiences. Brands will need consumers. And you'll need data that connects you to real people in the real world. So we explore, measure, innovate to show you what's next. With data that powers connections, backed by real science. Data you can trust, data that makes a difference. Because no matter what happens, we'll be here to show you what's next.
Our next presentation looks at the next steps in Africa's digital media research, and it will be presented by not a repeat offender, but rather I'll say a repeat great speaker. Yes, he's Joe Otten, and he's a digital advertising specialist and media research analyst with over 27 years of experience. He's the CEO of The Collective and a past president of PAMRO. Until 2014, he was the managing director of the Ipsos media division in the African region. And I say repeat great speaker because he was one of the panelists in yesterday's panel discussion, really put in the stellar work in sharing insights. And so in this next session, he'll be looking at Africa's adoption of technology being varied. We understand and we know that. And sometimes it is gradual, and other times it leapfrogs into cutting-edge technology without a moment's hesitation. But with all this said, in order to predict the next set of media consumption data, it is very necessary to review the history of media research across newly industrialized countries and developed nations. So the insights derived from this review will lay down the foundations for strategic initiatives within the business of media research in Africa. So Joe Otten, without wasting any more time, over to you.
Thank you very much, Sia. Thank you for that wonderful introduction. And yeah, I'm not really sure what to think about being called a repeat offender, but I've seen comments about your shirt actually on the chat. And I'm glad you saved that shirt for this special occasion when we have our largest PAMRO conference. But thank you so much for that wonderful introduction. And you've done an excellent job throughout the conference. So really, really nice to work with you. I'd like to wish a happy birthday to Jennifer. It is Jennifer's birthday. And again, a very special time when we're having our largest conference. And a lot of the success of PAMRO very much sits on the shoulders of Jennifer. And Jennifer, we're so pleased that Telma has continued to lend you to us so that we can continue to do this great work, grow the media industry, research industry, and Africa's economies. And just, yeah, to say again, once again, thank you to Sufiso Falala, our very able president, for making this happen. And, we're faced with a lot of uncertainties, but one thing that you made sure happened was that we had our annual conference and we were able to share some wonderful insights. It's great coming after Anne-Marie and Charlie. I really enjoyed their presentation, and what wonderful insights you have about how people are using devices and really looking at it from the perspective of high income individuals. I was quite happy to see that data because it sort of feeds into the information that I'll be sharing as well. I'm sort of beginning to look at what are the next steps in digital research, digital media research on the continent. And I don't really want to spend too much time talking about methodologies or spending time talking about the data itself, but I wanted to provoke some thinking with this presentation so that we can start to say, look at the opportunities that very much lay ahead of us and what kind of changes are taking place in our media landscape. So I want to talk a little bit about why it's important. Let's talk about the purpose. Why is it that we do this? Who are we serving and what are they using this information to do? Next thing, I want to talk a little bit about the obstacles. And, in Africa, we spend a tremendous amount of time talking about obstacles. And, but I think it's something that we need to address. And also just to give us an understanding of where we are in the journey towards, say, full development of the opportunities and commercial opportunities that we have. I want to talk a little bit about what's trending and looking at some data from our market, from Kenya, which I think mirrors a lot of the other African markets. And then, of course, talk a little bit about the next phase. So I wanted to talk about interactive advertising because after my long stint in research, I came back to my first love, which is advertising, but decided to do so from the more digital perspective because that's what we believed was the future. And so after doing a little bit of thinking and discussing with clients and other people in the industry, I came up with these three things that interactive advertising is. So interactive advertising, these are the sort of the principles that form what interactive advertising is. It's important to look at it from this perspective because with new media tends to come a lot of hyperbole, a lot of stuff that is not relevant to making a true impact in our marketing and in our communications. And so I thought, let's just break it down and start to say what is really key. First thing is, it's really about user first, understanding our consumers, understanding their psychographics, stages in life, buying patterns, and some of the things that we've seen this morning from Anne-Marie and Charlie, sort of help us to understand, what the user, what's one set of users sort of views and does. And it's important to be able to have this in mind when we go into interactive advertising. Marshall McLuhan wrote a book, The Medium is the Message. And at that time, he said that when technology and humanity start to come closer and closer together as it is today, then the techniques of the arts become even more relevant. And so when you think of the techniques of the arts, it really focuses on the audience. What are you creating for the audience? Next is we're looking at a connected world with about 3.4 billion internet users, going over 3.5 billion websites, and about 31 trillion emails, sent in the past 12 months. And actually, sometimes I look at my email inbox and I feel that most of those emails did get into my inbox. But in a connected world where all our devices and most of our time is spent on the internet, this is one of the things we're spending a tremendous amount of time creating these touch points with consumers and other audiences across the world. And then finally, it's results oriented. It's based on wanting to achieve a particular result and building our strategies around getting those results. And at the end of the day, spending some time measuring those results, right? And there's, I see a tremendous number of, as a judge in the Public Relations Society and the Marketing Society here in Kenya, I see that measurement of campaigns tends to be one of our weakest points. So let's talk a little bit about what it's not to help us just give us a better understanding. And the first thing is, it's not viral, and how many times do I see campaign objectives saying we want to take this video viral? I mean, how can that happen? When, when the most watched videos are probably the video by Megan Thee Stallion, with I don't know how many million views she got in, the first couple of days. And you look at most of the top watched videos on YouTube, you'll find that most of them are music videos. And so not all marketing campaigns can lend themselves to this kind of content. And so it's not about being viral, but it's much more about building, progressive building of audiences and views and impressions. Second thing is that it's not digital. And interactive advertising is really about looking at multiple touch points. And the word platform neutral becomes important here. And you look at shows like the American Idol, you look at how Coca-Cola, was able to integrate themselves into the show. And when the research was done and the measurement was done after that show, they found that Coca-Cola, that didn't necessarily play any ads, but used, various well-placed product, used shapes and colors throughout the show. They got the most memorability. People remembered Coca-Cola the most as being associated with the show. So it's not digital. It's not digital. It's not digital led. Finally, it's not intrusive. It doesn't sort of, again, looking at Coca-Cola or even cellular, singular cellular, on the American Idol show, the way they integrated it into the show did not intrude on your viewing experience and the experience that you had with the show and the stars, but it actually just integrated itself extremely well. So these are some of the things that we're trying to achieve in digital advertising. And we also want to understand how we can gain social media traction, looking at connecting with people, building trust over time, creating various segments on social media, nurturing familiarity, and creating content that satisfies people's tastes. And the various activities that we carry out in social media, it's difficult for us to be able to have impactful campaigns if we really don't know how people are using this medium, the internet, the web, social media, and other connected devices. And so as we proceed, we start to see that, yeah, there are some things that we're trying to achieve, and that includes things like reach. We want to reach a certain demographic with our campaigns. We want to, use the repetitive power of advertising and reach them a number of times, increase the number of impressions. One of the things that we always trying to do is increase engagement, because we find that with increasing engagement, we're now able to, number one, gauge the impact of the communications that and messaging that we've put out. We're able to see, we believe it's the first step in changing perceptions and eventually changing behavior. And we also want to entertain. We find that entertainment and humor in our market tends to do extremely well. And it's one of the things that keeps people with our content and eventually will help us achieve the goals, the overall goals that we're trying to, that we're aiming for. And then, of course, it helps us to then develop even better content at the end of it. And developing better content, we go right back into the cycle, and it is a virtuous cycle. So I wanted to just give this example, just in terms of looking at a relatively complex goal and using, here is what I call it a more old-fashioned way of influencing consumers. These were the days before the vloggers, before the internet influencers, social media influencers. But the National Health Service had wanted to, had a goal to increase breastfeeding because it generally meant there was better health for the children. And knowing that Neighbours was one of the top shows that was watched in the UK, they actually flew over to Australia to convince the producers of Neighbours, the TV series, to include breastfeeding when within the script, one of their the characters was pregnant and was just about to give birth. And indeed, they used breastfeeding became a part of the script and a part of the show. And breastfeeding increased significantly due to this initiative. So when you start to think about it from that perspective, you realize that there are complex things that we're trying to achieve with our content. And so it's not just reach numbers. Reach numbers alone will create an imbalance, will not give us the full picture. But we also want to try to truly understand what is motivating our consumers and how we can be able to then influence their thinking and influence their behavior. So, I'm sure you may see a lot of these images, of Africa. In fact, I think for some people, this is the image of Africa. Well, I must admit, I was in this place in Meru, just around Mount Kenya region, last year, probably around the same time. And I was pretty shocked, really, because sometimes, you live in the urban areas in Africa and it feels like, that we're very, we've really gone into the first, into the first world. But then, I always say in Africa, you always take a turn down one road and you'll find, the Africa that is yet to be developed. And this truly forms one of those obstacles we're talking about. So here we have a hut, and the lady that lives in this hut, grandmother, very much the oldest member of the family in the homestead. As you can see, there's no electricity going into her hut. She probably has a mobile phone, but it's one of those what they call dumb phones, and with buttons and probably a torchlight. And her media consumption, you again look at the roof of the building, it tells you whether she has a television or not. And from what we can see, she doesn't have a television in her hut. And so we are dealing with a huge percentage of people living in rural areas, and a lot of them living as this lady is. Now, I have to admit that around this building within the homestead were other more modern buildings, which had television, and we saw a number of people in this village with mobile phones and some with smartphones, right? So the 4G network is reaching them, but we have a huge population that is still rural, and I got this information from the Africa Growth Initiative. And one of the things, though, is that in Africa we have a pretty strong growth, probably the highest in the world of urbanization. And so this situation is not going to stay forever, but it also then begins to point out to the potential that we have and the commercial potential that there is for increased media use, for increased sales and growth of brands. But despite that, when you look at the what's happening in terms of media landscape, and I joined Stedman Group, which eventually became Ipsos in 2005, and the numbers looked very different at the time. Radio was practically 100%, television was at about 24%, print was at about 17%, and internet was really nowhere at the time. But now, when you look at regular usage, you see that internet has actually surpassed radio. 15 years ago, this seemed like it was, it wasn't possible. It was never going to happen. And now we are also seeing that the people who spend time on the internet are spending about 6.3 hours a day on the internet, as opposed to television, where they spend about 2.3 hours a day. We've also seen that internet usage is generally driven by the youth. They spend a tremendous amount of time. And if we took the survey that Anne-Marie and Charlie talked about earlier on, take it down to a lower income group, look at the age brackets, you'll generally see that the internet usage is being driven by the youth. And my next slide actually shows you that. Did a survey in Kenya, with about 2,600 sample size, plus minus 3%, margin of error. One of the things that we wanted to find out was what people were doing on social media. And we found it quite interesting. Initially, we thought there were celebrities and politicians that were being followed by, but the people were following. Sorry, Sia, but it's not you guys. People are following their friends and family. And so it means that whatever strategies we create, whatever communication and interaction we have with consumers, it's got to be something that they want to share with their friends and family, because that's where you have the most influence. Second thing we saw was that people are more interested in news content. It's not necessarily the daily political news, you know, what Zuma is doing today, or what, well, I guess Zuma's out of the news though. But you know what, say Uhuru Kenyatta and you know, and William Ruto, his deputy, are doing. But it's more about the news of current affairs in the activities that people are interested in. So whether it's sports or entertainment or other things, and they also like comedy. And we find that, you know, you'll see a lot of people looking at their phones and giggling to themselves. So we found that, you know, using comedy tends to help to grow our engagement. And then finally, it's the 80-20 rule, the Pareto rule, which is that, you know, 20% of the content is created, or the content is created by 20% of the people, you know, and a majority of them are just consuming that content, relatively quiet in looking at it and enjoying it. So let's talk about the next phase as I bring this now to a close. So what are we looking at? Well, in the 60s, audience research was developed, you know, by the guys in the UK and the US. And at that time, they used to say, why do we need audience research? You know, we already know what the consumers want. But eventually, audience research became important to be able to sell media slots, to be able to sell advertising. And but it was developed with television in mind, right? It wasn't really developed for radio. It was developed mostly for TV. And TV wasn't yet universal. It was a growing medium, but they could see the potential that it had. So if we take the same example now, if we're looking at developing today's research, then we should really be developing today's research with the internet in mind. And, you know, with the what we're calling platform neutral content, you know, with the time shifting, that's, you know, with all these news channels and, you know, TV channels going onto YouTube, so people can be able to watch their shows there, the streaming services. I think it's important that we should really be looking at the internet. Having our research today should really be internet-led. There's the question about declarative and passive methodology. And you look at what YouTube, Facebook, Google are providing us, the kind of data they provide us to provide to us advertising agencies. It's all passive information. But there's a huge part of the story that's not being told. And so we know that we are of the opinion that declarative you know, surveys are still extremely important, especially when you want to probe into why people are doing what they're doing. And so we can develop better content, we can interact with them even better. I guess, again, we look at diversified data collection infrastructure. And in Kenya, we had a single source you know, survey, radio, television, print, and internet. But the way that we're moving, and with the kind of technology and the infrastructure that's available to us today, it really can't be single source, and it has to be separate and diversified. Over time, most media houses, most advertising agencies, most technology companies are saying that these systems, to be able to collect this data, will become more affordable with time, bringing down the costs and improving the quality of the data. And therefore, it provides incredible commercial opportunities in Africa for any research company that wants to go into audience research and media data. So just to close, again, I was out in the Meru area. So where I showed you the image earlier on, being in a village, you know, now we went to a school that was a few kilometers, maybe about 20 kilometers from that village. And here you see an initiative by the Rotary Club to create these digital classrooms. And these are being spread across this particular region and in quite a number of towns and cities. And now you see that the students are learning in a very different way than we learned when we were growing up, using computers connected to the internet, and their lives and their outlooks are changing because of that kind of exposure. but then it really shows you that the direction that we're taking, the direction that we need to take, has to be led by the internet and the use of connected devices across our citizenry. You can find out more. There's much more information on my website, joetin.com. Quite a number of different pieces and articles written about what's happening in interactive advertising and what is happening in digital or in media research across our continent. So I'd like to end there and just to say thank you to Sia for giving me this opportunity. Thank you to PAMRO, and thank you to the sponsors and everyone else who's listening in today. I'd like to bring this to a close. Thank you.
Thank you, Joe. And please just don't mind me. I needed something cold just to nurse the wounds because of the stabs you were taking at me, Joe. Jeez, what is going on there? The perks of being at home, you can have some frozen veggies to pull a skit like that. And Joe, I don't know what you're trying to say about my shirt. You know, I don't know. This shirt to me represents my personality. It's not loud at all. It just is very subtle. It just says I'm a very reserved person, don't you think? Anyway,
I know, you know, I have a lot of opinions about a lot of things, but one thing I don't have an opinion of is your shirt.
Oh, thank you. Sure. Then consider yourself forgiven for all of that. Before we continue, ladies and gentlemen, here's a quick word from one of our partners. Njabu Hlanze is a consumer and market intelligence professional whose experience spans over 13 years. Now, currently, she's knowledge and insights manager at Coca-Cola based in Johannesburg. She manages the company's retail performance tracking protocols and leads consumer insights within the sparkling beverages portfolios. Now, she has worked at the world's leading market research, FMCG, satellite and space markets research companies, and she's bringing it all with her deep passion for Africa and driving its immense potential to grow and lead into this next presentation. Now, she's looking at how to stand out and stay winning as a brand. How to stand out and stay winning. You know, Joe, how to stand out, not like the subtle and quiet shirt I'm wearing. Anyway, so understanding who is consuming your brand, when they're consuming it, and why your brand is being conceived is crucial to unlocking growth. And a key component to a winning brand is relevant and unique differentiation, what Njabu calls brand edge. However, sustainable growth is what every brand needs to achieve. And this is done by building rituals across the consumer journey using various communication vehicles to touch a consumer. So let us take you on the journey of how Coca-Cola specifically took its brand on this path to achieving sustainable growth amidst very uncertain times, using the brand edge and rituals frameworks. Njabu, over to you.
Thank you ever so much, Sia. Thank you for that gracious introduction. And your shirt is standing out and standing out beautifully. So thank you so much. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, good day to you all, given how huge and large this conference is today. And I'd just like to thank you for your introduction, Sia. Yes, I'm Njabu Hlanze, Knowledge and Insights Manager at Coca-Cola. And today I'll be taking you on an exciting journey of how to stand out and stay winning as a brand. So without further ado, let me share my presentation with you. Great. So how to stand out and stay winning. What to expect for today. So I'm going to take you on a journey of how consumer insights are used to create and leverage brand edge to achieve brand growth and sustain these wins by having a seamless connection to consumer experiences and rituals. What is brand edge? Simply put, It's the relevant and unique features that give a brand an advantage versus its competitive set. You know, brands that are healthy and have the ability to grow exponentially have an advantage because they satisfy a need better than other brands. To gain this edge, other brands have to diverge from what is out there with a different and relative and a relevant story. So going deeper into this, what is being relevant to the consumer? Relevance to the consumer. This is a key set of attributes that statistically drive consumption within a defined segment of the population in a given moment in time. So this process of actually identifying these attributes and assessing their relevance really comes about as a mixture of art and science. And that's what really is what consumer insights are really. It's art and science. You know, attributes can be functional, attributes can be emotional, they can be linked to the brand personality, they can be about our assets, you know, associating with passion points, as Joe mentioned earlier on, you know, the Coca-Cola and idols, you know, music being a passion point, linking your attributes to your brand. And these could be the visuals of the brand, such as your logo, you know, your packaging. So you can sit with your key stakeholders and have, you know, and really brainstorm what are the attributes that are of the brand. And then also over and above that, use various market research tools and techniques to really look for what are these attributes, such as, especially the ones that elicit both conscious and especially unconscious thoughts to uncover and define the relevant category or brand attributes. So this is just one part of it. We've now identified what are the attributes of the brand, but are they relevant? Are they actually statistically driving consumption? And this is where the science bit comes in. You know, that's where you would run regression analyses, for example, to measure correlation. But on top of that, you need to make sure that even if it is correlated, it needs to be a causal correlation, you know, run various techniques such as path modeling techniques to further assess causal relationships between attribute and consumption. There are neuroscience methodologies that you can use. For example, you could use implicit association tests. You know, these tell us attributes are correlated with a positive attitude towards a brand, which is a predictor of choice behavior. So that is what relevance to the consumer is. Key set of attributes that statistically drive consumption within a defined segment of the population in a given moment in time. So now we know what the critical attributes are that drive consumptions. Now we need to look into the next variable, uniqueness to the brand. What is uniqueness to the brand? This is a key set of brand features that are statistically associated to the product promise or the product performance in a given moment in time. You know, we need to ensure, what we need to look into now is if you're differentiated on these attributes versus your competitors. You ideally want a really huge margin versus your competitor on these critical attributes, on these relevant attributes that actually drive consumption. If we could link back to an example of the implicit association test, we could then further add on to this test and then say, let's measure the strength of the implicit association between attributes and brands. And if a brand has a significantly strong association with a particular strategic or relevant attribute compared to the different brands and other brands that are associated with the attribute, then we can say that this attribute is unique. So this is what makes you unique. So now we have looked at the relevance to the consumer and the uniqueness to the brand. And if we were to plot these on an X and Y axes and assess this, we'd come up with this grid, what we call the brand edge framework. You have your relevance on your vertical axes and uniqueness on your horizontal axes. And if we were to divide this into quadrants, let's first look into your bottom left quadrant. Here, you'll find our brands that have relatively low relevance to consumers and are relatively not that unique, and what we'd call commodity brands. They are really the price of category entry. And the only differentiator here with these brands is really price. If we go further up, the top left quadrant, we have the alternatives. Here, we have brands that are highly relevant to the consumer that drive consumption, but not particularly unique. They are the Me Too brands, the alternatives, the imitators. And then we go to the brand features. So brand features are the ones that are highly unique, but they're not that particularly relevant and therefore do not drive consumption. So where do we want to be as a brand? We want to be at the top right quadrant, the brand edge quadrant. This is the goal that we want to be at. We want to be highly relevant with the attributes that are driving consumption and also highly unique so that we are differentiated versus our competitors and stand out. This is a sweet spot that makes a brand stand out and win versus its competitors. So this has all really been quite theoretical. Now, let's now put it into, real life examples. Let's take the emergence of BlackBerry. BlackBerry was the device that was designed as an indispensable tool for the businessman or woman with its signature keyboard that allowed for easy communicating. BlackBerry exploded in popularity due to its edge-defining attributes. These were your BBM Messenger for the exclusive BlackBerry Club, the full keyboard for easy typing. We didn't see phones that had that. And we had this once-off monthly fee for free browsing and messaging, providing access to the web and social sites, which were once very costly to many, and still are at this point in time. So, BlackBerry had its peak in 2007, where it saw about 20% global smartphone share, and in 50% in the US. They had a clear edge. They were addressing consumers' needs. They were fashionable, they were appealing in a number of colors. They were, they had tiered price offerings and devices across all networks. And then in 2007, something else also happened. January 9th, 2007, Steve Jobs debuted the iPhone, and it goes on sale in June 29th. This iPhone, it entered the market on the back of the success of the iPod. It was essentially all of Apple's best innovations in one: an iPod, a phone, and a breakthrough communications device. It really was something cutting edge at that point in time. Edge in the tech industry, it's driven by innovation, and Apple made a phone and a music player and an operating system that allowed for the use of the best stylus in the world, your finger, to give you access to the world in one device. So Apple now comes with this new single button, larger screen, better operating system, access to exclusive iTunes and Apple services in this aspirational lifestyle. And you find now that BlackBerry has now been moved down to becoming a brand feature. It just was like any other phone. So what does this tell us? It tells us that, listen here, over time, brand edge will erode. It will erode, and this is a warning. And as the law of nemesis says, find a good thing and the nemesis will want to snatch it from you. Nothing good is yours forever because others will want a piece of it. And basically, in a nutshell, if things are going well in your enterprise, you must be aware that the nemesis is lurking, since no successful effort goes unnoticed by competitors. So over time, brand edge will erode. And why is this? This is because fame and success attracts lots of imitators, but not all of them stay Me Too's. If we're to come to today, we could say iPhone is still in the brand edge quadrant, but we have, all these other new phones. You've got the Redmi that would be called in terms of the smartphone category, the commodities. You've got, those feature phones. And then you've got the Me Too's. But these Me Too's, we need to watch out for them. You've got the Huawei's, you've got your Samsungs, and they're not necessarily going to stay as Me Too's. And some people would actually even say that actually moved over to the brand edge. So you need to really be careful that your brand edge does not lose, your brand does not move from this quadrant, and watch out for those Me Too's. So how are we going to make sure we do this? Your brand edge needs to be dynamic. We've established that, you will establish brand edge using that framework that we've just gone through. You'll then capture gains when you're in that top quadrant. You'll attract competitors, and then law of nemesis kicks in. Your brand edge starts to erode. As a brand, you can take one of two paths. You can choose to reinvest and renew and reestablish your brand edge by strengthening your strengths and looking out for additional edge, or you could choose to be complacent and arrogant and actually kill your brand over time. So in order to retain that brand edge, we need to be consistently dynamic. We need to be relevant, we need to be unique and dynamic. And just a little show of what's been happening at Coca-Cola. We have been dynamic, we've been evolving over time. As you can see, all the way from 1899, if you can just see, this is just one example of how we've been evolving over time to today in 2020. So now, what's next? We know what is brand's edge, what differentiates the brand from its competitors, and actually what drives consumption. But how do we continuously get the consumer to continuously interact with our brand such that we can sustain brand growth? So how do we sustain brand growth? How do we get our consumers to make our brands part of their daily lives? How do we get them to make our brands always top of mind when going about their days, to the point where they don't even have to think about it, just comes naturally? This we do through brand rituals. So what is a ritual? Well, a ritual is an automated action which is sticky, it's resistant. It's in response to an environment, an occasion. It's aimed at making everyday life simpler and more efficient. And what most importantly is, it has that emotional reward. That's what's really important about a ritual. Every ritual has a mission. A ritual aims to meet an end goal that the consumer is looking to hire a product to do for them, and this helps building its emotional relevance. Right. So why is this important? As Francisco Crespa, our Senior Strategic Advisor to the Chairman of the Board and CEO of Coca-Cola says, by creating a ritual, our products, with our products and integrating them with every aspect of our consumers' lives, we can really drive growth. We really can drive growth. So how do we go about building these rituals? Well, building rituals really implies designing behaviors that will happen consistently. Behaviors that will happen consistently and repeatedly over time along the consumer's journey. So we have two factors here. The consumer's journey, we really need to understand the consumer. Once again, we need to delve into the consumer. And then there's designing the behavior. You know, we can look into behavioral science to unlock the subconscious and to understand how we make decisions using habits and rituals. So let's first start off with the consumer insights aspect. We really need to immerse ourselves within the consumer. You know, we really need to know who our consumer is. I think as Joe mentioned, user first, understand the consumer. You need to really understand the consumer. Who is your consumer? What are they doing? When are they doing it? Why are they doing it? What's motivating them to do this? Where are they doing this? Really get to understand your consumer, really get to understand them. And once you've really immersed yourself with your consumer, you will then understand what's the consumer truth? What's the consumer? What is their motives? What are their tensions? And from that, we can come up with a winning insight. From there, we then have to know, how does the brand's edge resolve that consumer tension along the consumer's journey? How do we meet the consumer's end goal? So that's where the building of rituals come in. We need to have a succession of behaviors required for the final ritual to take place along a consumer journey. So how do we go about building behaviors? Well, according to BJ Fogg, for any behavior to occur, we need to have motivation, we need to have ability and trigger. And without one of these, the behavior will not take place. And this is something that we really also look into at Coca-Cola. Motivation. Motivation is what drives the emotions. I want to seek pleasure. I want to avoid pain. I want to seek hope. I want to avoid fear, seek acceptance. I want to avoid rejection. That's what your motivation is. And how do we actually drive this? We drive these emotions through compelling storytelling. And we can deliver these compelling storytelling through deliverables such as media deliverables, such as, you know, your content, your occasion-based experience platforms, your out of home, your digital creatives, your television. There are various methods and tools and vehicles, media vehicles that we can use to deliver this compelling storytelling. And then we have the ability and triggers. Abilities drive behavior. They drive the I can. They are what, you know, how easy is it for the consumer to behave, to perform this behavior? So we as owners of the brand, we need to now find out, how can we make it easier for the consumer to perform this behavior using our brand? We've got various commercial tools that can enable this behavior. You know, we've got availability, make it widely available, make it affordable. You know, time, physical and mental effort. I mean, my colleague Jerusha Ramdeen touched on this yesterday. This is what her presentation was on, physical and mental availability. There's social norms fitting into the routines. And then we've got our triggers. Our triggers really, these drive behaviors by reminding. They prompt to initiate the behavior. This is how we reinforce and repeat the reinforced repeated behavior. I'm reminded to do this using the brand. You know, we can use this commercial tools once again to prompt behavior. You can use things like visuals, sensory, influences, social media. I always say, you know, when I pass by KFC, I'm sure there's this huge fan that really just sends out the smell of KFC, and automatically I'm triggered. I think I actually want some chicken. And those who know me know I love KFC. So that's a trigger. So this is what BJ Fogg's model is. Behavior needs motivation, ability, and triggers, and these need to be repeatedly done over time. Building rituals really requires designing behaviors that will happen consistently and repeatedly, because these need to be continuously done so that these can be done, so consumers can start to learn these behaviors and eventually they'll become rituals. And how do we do this? We make sure now, come together as your branding teams, your INC teams, everybody, to make sure that every strategy that we have is going towards that, building that behavior. You know, everything that we have in the branding plans, the strategic plans, the marketing plans, even as a company as a whole, should be towards building that behavior and consistently and repeatedly building that behavior so that it becomes a ritual. And here's an example of what is wildly known. What is a Coca-Cola ritual? It's our Coke and meals. When you think of Coca-Cola, you think of, this is something that I can have with my meal. It's great to share. I can connect with everybody at the table. You know, consistently we've been doing this for years, Coke and meals, constantly reinforcing, repeatedly doing it in all forms of commercial tools that we use. Here we've got Twitter that's being used, you know, we've got television advertising, we've got Facebook. There are various tools that we can continuously always remind people to engage and build this ritual. So, connecting all the dots. What's brand edge? Brand edge is that relevant and unique feature that gives an advantage versus its competitive set. And then we said that rituals, these bring about a sense of ceremony which result in consumers enjoying your product more. Brand edge within a ritual, now that enables us to satisfy the end goal better than any other brand, and builds effectiveness and builds loyalty and sustainable growth. And thus a brand that stands out and stays winning. So, you know, at Coca-Cola, we say that, you know, growth is not an objective, growth is a discipline. A discipline is training people, lots of people to act consistently and follow certain behaviors and rules. But discipline is also a branch of knowledge and a field of study. And when you practice that discipline, then the outcome is growth. So as your business, as a brand, you need to have that discipline that is driven through from the top all the way through the business, throughout the business, vertically and horizontally. Everything needs to be about that growth, and it should become a bit of discipline so that it actually manifests into sustainable growth. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Njabu. That was very, very insightful. Look, I have to admit, you talk about the KFC trigger that you have. Well, we have a Coca-Cola trigger. That sound of a can opening. I do not know where I don't care where you are or what you're doing. When you hear that sound, you instantly want one, and you want one now.
Thank you. That's exactly it. Sound of that can opening and the ice blocks and the glass. Yes. Coca-Cola.
Okay, let's stop it now, because I'm trying not to focus on Coca-Cola anymore and how much I want it. Thank you so much for that. So I did say that please feel free to send through your questions using the live chat feature. Both Njabu and Joe are here to answer your questions. And so we have two to quickly go through. I'll start with you, Joe. Now, you speak about the next steps that brands can take and people can take to make sure that they are ahead of the technological age and rather a journey. If you could give advice for someone today and right now when it comes to adopting tech successfully, what would that be? A takeaway from what you've spoken about today that people can start implementing right now, what would that be?
Well, Marsh, thanks for the question, and I think it's a really interesting question because it's really about being action-oriented and being pragmatic. But I sort of go back to Marshall McLuhan, who said, the medium is the message. And when social media started, it was the medium is the message once again. And but when he talked about taking when humanity and technology start to become even more seamless, we need to go back to the techniques of the arts. I feel that when I look at the studies that we have today, we're getting tremendous amount of data from Facebook and from Google and from all these ad servers. So as an advertising agency, I almost don't need to go to a research house to be able to get this data. It's live, it's in real time, and it's quite a lot. But the thing that's really missing is actually some of those, I'd say even traditional surveys. And so my first thing would be get yourself a panel, of internet users, refresh this panel on a regular basis, and give us data of how they, what's changing in their use, how they, what's changing in their views, what's changing, why are their habits changing. And I think that information will be useful today. This will be useful, for time immemorial. If you can do this from a more technology-based, approach, where you're doing the study through connected devices, the better. But we do need to have that declarative data that's lacking across the continent, and that would help strengthen our strategies as advertising agencies.
Right. And Njabu, a question for you. You do acknowledge that we're in uncertain times, and some brands feel like playing safe is sometimes easier, just in general and in these times. So why would you suggest a brand not to play safe in a time like this?
I think it's really important for us to understand our consumer and not act for the sake of acting because everybody is actually doing something as a brand. You need to really know, and it needs to be a relevant message. And if it is relevant, if it will touch points with your consumer, then act. That's what I'd really say. I mean, when COVID started, we saw a number of brands going out there, putting out messages for the sake of putting out a message, but you really need to know something that will touch your brand, because we really don't want the consumer to get tired of this overload of the whole, just using this pandemic. So that's what it is. I mean, at Coca-Cola, we actually chose to pause all our marketing at that point in time during COVID and repurpose our investments and move them towards actually the COVID-19 response, because we felt that was what was more important at that particular point in time for our consumers, for our customers, for our entire ecosystem. So it's all about what is important to your consumer.
Perfect. And just one final question for you, Njabu. The comment is very interesting presentation. And the question is, are there easy proxies to measure relevance and uniqueness? How would you recommend an easy way to measure these attributes?
As I said earlier on, not every company or every brand could have the budget to conduct wide-scale research. We found ourselves at a point in time, use what you currently have, try and go back into the research and be innovative, dig deep in what you currently have. If you don't have that, sit down, as I mentioned, have an internal brainstorming session, workshop with all the brand stakeholders. Sit down with your brand stakeholders and say, okay, your branding team, your marketing team, what would we call an emotional attribute? What would we call your functional attribute? What is linked to a brand personality? And that's where you can actually start from, using those brand attributes.
Perfect. Thank you very much to everyone who sent in their questions. And Njabu and Joe, thank you very much for taking time to answer them. That was Joe Otten, Chief Executive Officer at The Collective, a digital ad agency, and Njabu Hlanze, Knowledge and Insights Manager at Coca-Cola. Thank you once again. So moving on with the rest of our program, right here, day 2 of the PAMRO virtual conference. It's time for a very quick coffee break, and we'll be back in the next few minutes. You're still with us, and it absolutely means a lot. Thank you so much for sticking through the second day of the Pan-African Media Research Organization virtual conference, the very first of its kind. We've reached the final stretch of our day's proceedings, so just bear with us. It will be absolutely fascinating as we wrap the day up. Look, if you're on social media, tell us what you think about the conference as it goes as well. Hashtag PAMRO21. That's hashtag PAMRO21. You can also let your friends and your colleagues and counterparts know just how cool you are and how much they're missing out on. Specifically, if you're on Twitter, you can use @PAMRO_org. So now, before we just wrap things up, let's hear one final word from our partners. A quick reminder, by the way, that as you listen to the presentation and have any comments or questions for our next presenter, you can let them know by adding to our live chat function. Leave your comments and questions there, and we'll get to it as the presentation wraps up. Look, our next presenter is originally from Australia. So if you squint, he has a very similar accent to me in South Africa. I've had to say I feel rather inferior as I present and introduce everyone. And here they are sounding very professional and forward-thinking by pronouncing it as data. And then here I am saying this data. So apologies for the South African accent, but my official and fellow Sapphirs, you understand where I'm coming from, right? You aren't holding it against me? Thank you. Another perk of it being virtual, I'm not hearing you boo if you are. So without wasting any more time, let me introduce our next presenter. His name is Jonathan Wells, and he leads the data science team that supports Nielsen's international media business. Now, he focuses on the design, delivery, and support of the solutions that underpins Nielsen's total audience measurement strategy across markets around the world. Now, Jonathan has over 25 years of experience, and he's worked in a number of client-facing and operations-centric roles for some of the world's most largest and professional services and technology companies. He graduated from the University of Melbourne in Australia with a degree in economics and finance, and is currently based at Nielsen's Global Technology and Innovation Center in Tampa, Florida. So today he'll be gracing us with his presence, and he'll be chatting about the global digital viewing trends through COVID-19 and beyond, and sharing trends from South Africa and across the globe, showing not only viewership trends, but advertising spend too. Get ready once again to make several notes through this presentation. Without wasting any more time, over to you, Jonathan Wells.
Thank you, Sia, and hello, everybody. It is such a privilege and, in fact, a joy to be invited to speak at this conference again this year. So big thank you to PAMRO, and thanks to all of you for staying on the line to spend some time with me today. I know we'd all prefer to be on the beaches of Mauritius, but having joined the sessions yesterday and this morning, I think we have an incredible and compelling alternative format to share our experience given the times that we find ourselves in. But a big thanks, obviously, for that to Arena Events, and of course to you, Sia, for doing such a great job of keeping us all engaged. Let me share my screen and we will go through the content that I wanted to show you today. And hopefully that gets us up and running. Okay, so it's also not unusual, Sia and I were joking earlier, it's not unusual for the data science guy to get the last presentation of the day, but I promise that I will keep to time, and I hope that you're all going to stick with me for what I hope you'll find to be a very useful discussion. We're going to look at some data-driven insights, or some data-driven insights from a couple of Nielsen's audience measurement products, as well as our advertising intelligence service. And my goal today is really to provide you with some global as well as some African trends that we've observed as we've progressed through 2020. In particular, I want to show you the impact that the story of 2020, that COVID-19, has been having on media consumption and on advertising spend. So let's just jump straight into it. If you look at year-to-date television trends, it's evident that many markets saw spikes in average TV viewing time as the pandemic took hold locally. And here are a sample of markets that shows some of the different patterns that we see on display, including you'll see South Africa here in the bottom right-hand corner. Now, as you look at these charts, it's really interesting to call out and see how the orange bars, which is this year's data, peak well above the blue lines, last year's data, in those timeframes where the pandemic was taking hold, local governments were instituting lockdowns, people were spending obviously much more time in their home. In our analysis, what's been interesting is that, really the trends have fallen into some of the patterns that you see on this particular chart. So you'll see that, in markets like Cyprus and Greece, there were very, very extreme increases. Poland was a little bit more normalized, and equally in South Africa, you'll certainly see in weeks 13 through sort of 17, which was kind of a April-May timeframe, you will see very significant increased average time viewing, relative to what we were seeing in similar trends last year. Now, what's also interesting from these charts is that you can see that as the lockdowns have begun to relax, we see people returning to viewing patterns that are much more consistent with the same time last year. So the orange and the blue lines start to converge. So while this data is likely to follow similar patterns if and when subsequent waves of lockdown and the virus take hold, what we have seen so far does seem to suggest that COVID itself is probably unlikely to have any long-term or sustained impacts on viewing levels. And I choose those words very, very carefully. Overall viewing levels, and we'll explain why a little bit later on, we think are going to stay fairly consistent, albeit that maybe some of the content and the advertising messaging itself is likely to change. Let's dig a little bit into some additional views of the data that we've pulled from our panels in South Africa. The charts on the left here contrast viewing by what we call day parts between this year and last year, both for April at the height of the local pandemic and the most recent complete month of data that we've been able to produce, which is September. So as you might expect, there are actually significant differences when you look at this year over year in comparison with the April data. This is actually something that Mohammed, I think, mentioned in yesterday's panel discussion, and the data really proves it out. What you can see is the gray line, which shows the percentage change in viewing compared to the same time last year. And you can see that in terms of percentage change of viewing, there's a big uplift or a big shift in the earlier parts of the day. Traditionally, television is a medium where prime time happens towards the end of the day. But here you can very clearly see, in terms of change, big growth in the earlier part of the day. The spike that you see over here is a little bit misleading because the basis of comparison is very small. So a small change on a low base will produce a big percentage variance. But really the thing to remember here and to look at is that this trend here did persist throughout the majority of the lockdown stages. People were spending more time with TV earlier in the day than they had in pre-COVID or pre-lockdown times. The lower chart is important for you to look at as well, though. So this is the more recent data. This is a comparison of September 2020 to September 2019. And what you can see there is that viewing seems to be normalizing and flattening out and becoming a little bit more consistent with what we saw this time last year, even though in this instance we are seeing less TV viewership overall. That less TV viewership, again, we'll explain a little bit about what we think is happening there as we move forward. The other thing I wanted to show you was the chart on the right-hand side here. And what this looks like, what this is looking at is comparing total TV viewership by week between 2020, the blue line, and 2019 in the red line. This is in numbers of individuals. So this isn't about time spent. This is about the total number of people. And you see this same trend, right? As the pandemic took hold in South Africa and as lockdowns were instituted, more people were spending more time with TV relative to what we're seeing now, where there's obviously a bigger fluctuation, but greater consistency with the data from last year. So yes, a little bit of a decline in the raw TV viewing, but we're seeing something that is a little bit more comparable and consistent with what we had expected to see relative to last year. So what happens next? Let's talk about maybe where some of that viewing has gone. And this is also a very important thing to understand. This is, by definition, US data, so I want to be very clear about that. But they tell a really interesting story about streaming viewership in the US, which is, from Nielsen's perspective, one of those markets that really is a leading indicator for media behaviors globally. In fact, Joe referenced some of this in the context of the discussion yesterday around streaming and online viewership in Africa. This is real data though, and so we can look at what's happening in the US, and they show how streaming data for the beginning of July, and the beginning of August, or sorry, for the end of July and beginning of August this year, is really sort of starting to shape out. On the left, you can see the streaming, you can see a view of streaming data by streaming service. And on the right, we're going to talk a little bit about streaming consumption by age group. And there are some fascinating insights that come out of these charts. I know they might be a little bit hard to see, and there's lots of very small numbers in there, but here's sort of the overview to take away. The overall numbers, I think the overall streaming numbers, it's fair to say, are down from the peaks that we saw earlier in the pandemic in the US. You can see this 122.3 minutes for the week of the 10th of August. That is the total number of, or the average number of minutes spent on streaming that we recorded in that week. At the height of the pandemic in the US, that number was closer to 170 total streaming minutes back in the April and May timeframe. But year over year, what's interesting here is that the streaming growth is still very significant. So when we talked about the TV numbers starting to erode a little bit in a year-on-year comparison, it's not because viewership is going away, it's just shifting to other platforms. This is really important because, again, when you look at a normalized year-over-year comparison, and I think the August data is a good way to do that, we are still seeing in the US a greater than 25% increase in time spent with streaming services. That's about 122 minutes versus about 98 minutes, a little under 100 minutes that we were seeing this time last year. On the left, you can see that the market is still being led, the streaming market is still being led by Netflix. Although, if we were to look at year-ago comparisons, and you can see the Netflix number here at about 32% of total streaming time. If you looked at that about a year ago, that number was up closer to 40%. So the Netflix share is dropping by about 5 to 10%. And what we think is, and what we're seeing happening, is that most of that is seeming to move into the new entrant, Disney Plus, who joined the marketplace, the streaming marketplace, back in the first quarter, with about 26.5 million viewers when they launched. As of August, they have about 60.5 million subscribers. So clearly Netflix's share is being compressed by the increase or the addition of Disney Plus as it has come into the US market. Now, another really interesting thing to point out when we look at the right-hand side of this chart, and I think this is where really we as a research community and as the industry should be paying a lot of attention. What really jumps out is the very even split that you see between younger demo groups and older demo groups, right? The 27% there represents people 55 plus and the amount of time that they are spending, or the share that they have of the overall streaming activity that's going on. So in fact, about a quarter of streaming is being done by people who are 55 plus, and that's up over 5 points over the last year. So what that tells us is that streaming is not exclusively a young person's domain. And I think what has happened with COVID in particular, as the lockdowns have taken place, we've seen households, in particular older demographics, starting to subscribe to these services, and they are continuing to consume. So their total media time, again, has not decreased at all. What they're doing is shifting where they are getting their content from. A really important thing for us all to think about as we move forward. There are a couple of other interesting observations that we see from a Nielsen perspective in terms of the overall streaming environment. In Q2 of this year, we saw a very significant milestone, and that milestone needs to be very well understood. 25% of total TV usage in streaming eligible homes, so in those homes that have access to a streaming service, fully 25% of TV usage was spent on TV streaming content. So again, this is where we're moving from the traditional broadcast model, and we are seeing consumers embrace and spend more and more time with their streaming content. Now, that's a really impressive number. That 25% is a big number. But even more interesting is the opportunity to watch streaming services that are starting to happen. So of those households in the US who subscribe to a subscription video on demand service, a Netflix or an Amazon or a Hulu, fully 25% of them have increased the number of services that they purchase. Now, again, this is as much a product of new entrants coming into the market as the streaming wars, as we call them, take greater and greater hold. There are more providers, and we just heard a conversation around how losing that edge as your competitors and nemesis step into the breach. This is exactly what we're seeing happening in the US as companies like Disney Plus, who I mentioned, HBO Max, and a number of other services are coming into the marketplace. They're clearly contributing to the fact that the consumers have more choices, they are subscribing to more services, and as a result, we're starting to see some of those share shifts move across all of the various sources that we have. Okay, enough of the data specific to television. Let's pivot and spend a few minutes looking at some of the advertising trends that we've observed around the world. The first thing I want to start with is this slide, which really sort of provides a snapshot of a number of our major European markets and the advertising activity that's going on there. Similar to the TV data, what we do see is very strong impact in the first half of the year. That is now starting to sort of slowly return to normal. So consistently, in terms of advertising spend, overall advertising spend, we were seeing 20 to 30% declines in the first half of the year. Now, since then, it is encouraging to see that many of those data points are starting to reverse. And we are now in the second half of the year seeing either much smaller declines relative to last year, or in some cases, actually growth. So we're actually now starting to see, for some platforms and some media, expansions and increases in advertising spend relative to last year. You can see that particularly with the 14% radio increase in Germany, as well as increases in Spain as well. So there you can see 14% of radio increase in Spain, and Germany also is showing an increase on the radio side of close to 13%, nearly 14%. So this is really, really interesting from the perspective that shift is changing. The other thing that I want to call out from the data that we've collected in France is that you do see the marketplace adjusting to the new reality. So while there were overall TV spend declines of about 30%, what's really interesting is that by the time you get to July of 2020, volumes are starting to increase. So there are clearly people taking advantage of price and reduced prices and reduced opportunities from the broadcasters and taking advantage of that to drive volume. So there are clearly still opportunities for advertisers and marketers to take advantage of the situation, particularly as we transition in and out of the lockdowns and the environments that we're in. Let's talk a little bit about Africa, because Africa is not immune to this either, and we're seeing very, very similar things. Here, this is specifically South African data for advertising spend. What you can see on the left are some pretty provocative, dramatic reductions in media spending in the first half of the year, particularly in April through June, as the pandemic, as I said, took hold in the local markets. Total media down 20%. I mean, look at cinema, obviously not a surprise as cinemas closed, but a 55% net reduction in spend change. That's a big deal. But even in print and radio and TV, you see similar big numbers coming in there. But the table on the right also tells an interesting story. And what we're looking at here is combined ad spend on radio and on TV. And these are monthly comparisons between 2019 and 2020. So we've sort of tried to, and with those dotted lines, tried to sort of delineate or differentiate between individual markets. Now, look at the very steep drops that we see in April and in May, and to a lesser extent in June, right? Again, as the pandemic took hold, as the lockdowns happened locally there in South Africa, spending dropped. Aggregate spending across TV and radio dropped. You can start to see that normalize a little bit, but there are still very significant differences year on year. Maybe to contextualize that just a little bit more, let's look at this chart. And this amplifies the story that we just talked about. But I thought it might be interesting to look at this in terms of the relative change for both radio and TV. So this is an absolute, this is relative. If you look at the entire year, what you do see earlier in the year, right, there were actually in January and February, we see increases in advertising spending. People were very confident, the markets were looking good. Then you hit April, and as the virus started to break out in China, it moved to Italy, a lot of concerns and conversation around how it was going to spread. Advertising kind of took a pause, right, and stayed pretty constant with a relative conversation to last year. So clearly there was some caution and some pause. And then what you start to see as the pandemic progresses is the steep declines that took hold through April and May, right? So again, all of a sudden now in relative terms, our spending rates on TV and radio drop dramatically. Now, the data is encouraging because what you start to see beyond May and June is that the annual declines are starting to flatten out. So what this green line is reflecting here is that the changes, the net changes are starting to normalize and flatten out. It is interesting that in South Africa, you see that radio bucks the trend that we saw in Germany and in Spain, some of those other markets that we talked about a couple of slides ago, where we were seeing growth in ad spend or only nominal declines in the second half of the year. And time is going to tell. I still don't have an answer for you as to why we're seeing that drop specifically in South Africa in radio, but this is what the data tells us right now. And I think subsequent months will hopefully give us a little bit more insight into why that is happening and what the sustained trend looks like. Time will tell whether these trends continue or whether they are going to be further complicated by any subsequent waves of the pandemic. We know, right, we're observing from all of the health data that is coming in that we are not done with this by any stretch, and there is more disruption coming. The question will be, how long does that take to work through, and will things change dramatically from what we've experienced and seen in the first half of this year? So yesterday, you heard Bev and Kambe talk about how consumers are shifting to zero sugar CSDs as they focus on more health during the pandemic. And there's actually a consistent theme here in advertising messaging overall. It's adapting to the world that we find ourselves in. So here are a couple of examples that we've drawn from our advertising intelligence service to just sort of describe the way some of those methods are, or measurements or communications are pivoting. So if you look at the top left, you know, Lloyds Bank in the UK is starting to advertise around the way they are changing the way that they support businesses as businesses evolve, right? And as businesses take on different ways of adapting to the pandemic. On the right, you can see Prisma, who are a hypermarket chain in Europe, recognizing that as people shift to new working environments, they probably have more immediate needs that can be satisfied through deliveries and through other services that can be pushed and consumer goods that can be pushed straight into their homes. The environment, obviously a big theme. EDF is a power generation company. What they're doing is obviously continuing to pursue and emphasizing their pursuit of the way that the environment has actually benefited and impacted from the fact that there have been less CO2 emissions. I don't know if any of you have seen the images coming out of places like Venice, where there are now dolphins back in the canals and you can see the bottoms of the canals. So the environment has clearly benefited, dare I say that, from the pandemic. And I think companies are rallying around that as well. And equally FairPrice, who are a grocery retailer on the right-hand side, the red box here, focusing on this notion of appreciating the connections that we have to people, to our family, to our loved ones. So messaging is also sort of starting to shift and adapt to what the pandemic is telling us. And where this is even more pronounced, I think, here's another great example in terms of the way that product-driven messaging is really getting to the forefront. The lockdown, for the most part, has eliminated many of the reasons that a consumer would want to use their car, driving to work, traveling to social occasions, or even taking those proverbial road trips on vacation. But as restrictions are starting to lift, the automotive sector itself is attempting to take advantage of the public's desire to get out of the house, to go and explore the world again. So here you can see specifically some ads from Lexus, from Toyota, from BMW, who are all asking their consumers, you know, where's the first place that you'd like to travel? How can our vehicles be used to take advantage of any of these adventures that you want to pursue? So while the creative is still focusing on the consumer, the car is being portrayed as a beacon of hope for this return to normality that we're all seeking. The other industry that I just want to quickly highlight, and this will be no surprise to any of you, is, you know, the sector which really I think has been probably hardest hit during COVID-19 is travel. Airline losses are projected to be more than $84 billion this year. And as travel bans begin to be lifted, again, airlines are starting to get back into the marketplace. They're starting to plan flights again. But the interesting message from an airline perspective is that consumer trust and confidence is really the key to reclaiming some of the profits that they've lost during the year. If you look at a couple of examples here, Sky Airlines in Chile, or BA, are releasing creatives that demonstrate how stringently they're going to be upholding cleanliness and personal hygiene on their aircraft. In a similar vein, Turkish Airlines have been employing dedicated hygiene experts on each flight to make sure that passengers stay aligned with and compliant with safety guidelines. The CEO of American Airlines has been speaking directly to consumers through advertising campaigns. So in the coming months, the travel industry is going to have to tap into the collective daydreaming of consumers and that daydreaming that they've taken part in during lockdowns, where they fantasized about traveling abroad while having to stay indoors, tempting people back to airports and reinvigorating this ailing sector with this myopic focus on building trust and confidence. So let me wrap up with a couple of final thoughts. With more time in the home, obviously, as we've seen, more and more media is being consumed. But life in the lockdown has certainly changed how we perceive our world. Attitudes are shifting, and people are now valuing our planet, both from a social and an environmental standpoint. Likewise, some of our priorities have likely been altered, with many workers unwilling to return to offices and the life that they knew before COVID-19. While our data clearly shows that audiences have not gone away, there have been some fairly big declines in advertising spend. And gaining consumer confidence, as I've talked about, and trust is really the key thing that we believe businesses must address in the short term. Customers have to feel safe and protected as physical stores reopen. A brand's use of social media can certainly provide crucial mechanisms to leverage this sense of assurance. And as brands use these pages to outline how they're safeguarding their consumer experience, we do expect to see that trust and that level of participation in the marketplace come back. One of the key things, though, that I think our research is highlighting is the difference between how consumers and businesses are going to react in a post-pandemic world. So while companies may use the virus as a catalyst for change, and we've seen that in terms of the advertising campaigns and the messaging that's going out there, they have to stay very close to what consumers are doing. Because consumers actually, we think, are going to be inclined to return to most of, or many of, the habits and the lifestyle they had established for themselves pre-lockdown. So physical stores might be reopening, but brands can't lose the progress that they've made, even with things like e-commerce, right? And being able to sell digitally to consumers in their home. That's a really, really important thing that I think is on everybody's mind in the industry. But the real question, I think, for all of us is how much of this is going to be sustained over time? Are we looking at long-term societal change, or are consumers going to fall back into those older behavioral patterns? Time will tell, and we're looking forward to continuing to track that data as we move into 2021 and beyond. And with that, I want to thank you all for your time, and I really appreciate the opportunity to be in front of you all. Thanks again.
Jonathan, thank you. You're an absolute rock star there. Thank you so much for sharing your insights with us. Just before we wrap up for the day, we have some questions and comments. Starting off for you, Jonathan, from Simon Thomas. Well, Simon just shares a comment here saying, Jonathan, across Europe and Australia, we're seeing similar switching from linear TV to stacked streaming over-the-top media services, especially on connected TVs. So he agrees that Netflix shares dropping, Disney Plus is growing fast, and new videos on demand services are growing fast. He just also adds that the big worry is that TAM panels and vertical OTT measurements are creating more and more unmeasured viewing. Would you agree there?
Look, I would. This is a really big challenge for the industry at large, and we need to figure this out. And I think, the research companies are actually all progressing and making good headway against all of this. But I do think that digital measurement as a discipline, and that over the top and that streaming measurement, particularly on the digital devices themselves, is the big challenge to all of us right now. We know that device identification is becoming more problematic or challenging in this heightened world of privacy that we find ourselves in. Panels are stressed, absolutely, because of the fragmentation that we see, the different devices that are available, the myriad of different platforms, and getting coverage is really the big challenge that all of the research companies face. And I think we are working really, really hard in anticipation of that and trying to prepare ourselves for what's ahead.
Right. And then, Jonathan, there really are endless possibilities here when it comes to data and what we can do with it. Personally, for you, what's the most exciting thing about having so much information out there?
I think it's the richness that we're starting to get from all of this stuff, Sia. I think in the past, measurement has really been all about looking at things at a point in time, right? On a particular day or for a particular campaign, you get a quantification or a quantified measure of what's happening. As we have more and more data, and as our analytic capabilities and the machine learning algorithms get smarter and smarter and smarter, what we're now starting to do is to be able to inform that measurement with more longitudinal data. So we can really start to do a much better job of modeling solutions, modeling measurement. Coming back to the question that we just had, part of our solution lies in being able to track behaviors over time and using those behaviors as indicators of exposure. And that, I think, is the way that ultimately we're going to solve the fragmentation problem. But I think we're just getting so many more insights out of looking at data from a more broader and holistic perspective rather than just individual transactions.
Right. And then lastly, Jonathan, I just want to help you out here. You have a difficult job, but I think if I share my personal data with you, it will make things easier for you. From the household of Sia Sangweni, here are just some stats. There has been, over the past couple of months, 0% Netflix watching. I have been working out every day. I have been cooking every day and eating healthily. And of course, just when I engage with people over meetings and, Zoom calls like this, the reason why I have my video off is just because the Wi-Fi was weak, not because, my hair is unkempt or anything. So yeah, that's just personal data from me. Yeah.
In the business sphere, we would call you an outlier.
Yes. Thank you. And of course, I'm also wearing pants right now. Well, thank you, Jonathan. I'll end it right there. That concludes day 2 of the 2020 PAMRO Virtual Conference. Wherever you're watching us from, it absolutely means a lot. And thank you to all of our presenters and speakers for engaging with us today. Luke Biggins, the VP of Client Development at Reality Mine, Mike Smith, the MD of Media Host, Anna-Marie van Elfringhoff, Senior Research Executive at Ipsos, Charlie Fox, the Associate Research Director at Ipsos as well, Joe Otten, Chief Executive Officer at The Collective, a digital ad agency, Njabu Hlanze, the Senior Vice President of Data Science, Njabu Hlanze, pardon me, Knowledge and Insights Manager at Coca-Cola. Tons of titles going on there. And Jonathan Wells, last but definitely not least, Senior Vice President of Data Science at Nielsen Media. And thank you, by the way, and as well to our partners who have made a day like this possible, to Borderless Access, DSTV Media Sales, Nielsen, and Telmar. So on behalf of the whole Pan-African Media Research Organization team, that's PAMRO, thank you so much again for joining us. That concludes day 2 of our virtual conference. Join us again tomorrow as we conclude our conference from 11 a.m. to 2 p.m. That's Central African time. Until then, you can continue the conversation through our live chat or also on social media, hashtag PAMRO21, and specifically on Twitter at PAMRO_organization. We'll continue chatting the story of African resilience. And of course, if you need any more extra information, visit the website pamro.org. Until tomorrow, thank you once again for joining us. My name is Sia Sangweni. Take care.
The Pan-African Media Research Organization started in 1999 with representation from only 13 countries. Today, 21 years later, the Media Research Organization boasts over 800 members and counting across 27 countries on the continent. Celebrate PAMRO's research expertise across Africa by becoming a member today. Visit www.pamro.org. If you do business in Africa, then this is one organization you should be part of. Not only will you get to network with industry experts and thought leaders, but you will have the opportunity to exchange knowledge and learn from big brand successes and failures in Africa. Membership will offer benefits such as access to country reports, discounts to conferences in amazing countries, and ongoing learning through papers, presentations, and harmonized questionnaires in different languages. Plus, a portion of your membership goes to uplifting the industry through Student Education Fund. Visit www.pamro.org